Hello, everyone. It is your host, Greg, the head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers. And I hope you had an awesome Christmas. And this is filmed literally right before New Year's. So I'm hoping you have a great New Year's. I just got done interviewing David Bean. He runs a business called Nira that is literally bringing, like, you'll hear later in the episode, but my Greg approved marketing line for him, space station approved lasers for your face. This is a really cool business. This is an e-commerce store that is selling this handheld laser for skincare. It like brings like professional dermatology tools, lasers basically to your face to like heal a bunch of different things with your collagen. He explains it much better than I will, but I got him on here to talk a bit about what it was like growing this business. He is a very product-led entrepreneur, which is always a treat for me when I get to meet one of those who is not just like the marketing guru, but actually like his knowledge about the product is quite out of this world, which you'll see in the episode. And I think he brings really good passion and shows you like you don't need to know everything about go to market or the latest attribution strategy or whatever to really break through into the market if you understand your product and you understand what your customers really want. I just enjoyed this podcast. If you're also an e-commerce owner and you're looking to scale, perhaps you're looking to scale with investors, we also touch a bit on that. I think he has some great wisdom to share with you on who you should go for and who you should avoid, as well as how it's actually a lot easier than you might think to call up people that you thought were totally out of your league to talk to. He goes on a little whole thing there where he ended up talking to tons of different CEOs that he literally just cold called, and they were totally cool with giving him advice. So a lot of really cool wisdom here. I didn't get into all the questions I wanted to. So we might bring David back for another episode to talk more about the marketing and the KPIs he focuses on. By the way, I think you're going to really enjoy this podcast. So I'll stop talking here and we'll get right into it. I'll see you on the other side. All right. I got David Bean here with me. David, we had a pretty good chat before we hit the record button here. But for everyone who does not know who you are, why don't you introduce yourself and where you are in the world today?
Oh, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's David Bean. I'm from the Boston area of Massachusetts. Just moved to southern New Hampshire. Engineer by training in lasers, laser physics, semiconductor lasers specifically, and created a couple companies. One company to kind of democratize lasers into some cool new areas outside of telecommunications, and the second company looking to revolutionize skincare by bringing lasers home.
Wow, what a transition from engineering lasers to moving into the skincare world. So that's pretty cool. I have another friend, he's an engineer who's now like a massive SEO success story. So there seems to be a common trend with engineers and internet businesses, which is kind of cool. Walk me through that transition though. So you're an engineer. How did that lead into your entrepreneurial journey? Did you always want to start your own business, or was it kind of like a accidental thing that found you?
Well, actually, it started out when I was younger. My father worked for IBM. He was the traditional, gray suit IBMer, a lifer with them. So when I was a young child, he brought me into this room, and there was whirling fans, the raised floor, these big circular things turning, and a punch card device. And he said, "This room is a computer, and it can do the work of 100 people." And I was like 5, 6 at the time. I thought, wow, this is cool. A room that can do the work of 100 people, you know. And over my, childhood, I saw that go from that to mainframes, to kind of remote terminal mainframes, then workstations, and then personal computers, and then laptops. And then, of course, now we have cell phones and computers in our hands. So I always just was amazed at automation and technology. So I went into engineering, and actually my father moved and my family when I was in college to Europe and lived in Germany. And at the time I would visit when I was out of college during my breaks studying engineering. He introduced me to some engineers in Germany that were developing semiconductor lasers, or lasers on a semiconductor chip, whereas previously lasers were gas driven or a crystal laser to invert the electrons to coherent wavelengths and emit photons. But doing it in a semiconductor was like groundbreaking. I thought that was so cool. So anyway, that kind of got me the bug. And then I went into, when I graduated, telecommunications with a company called Corning Incorporated. They lay down, more fiber. They make fiber optics. In fact, they invented the whole fiber optic technology that enables our telecommunications. So anyway, I thought that was cool, but I always wanted to see an industry like my father's transform the world. So that's where I got into telecommunications, because that went through the huge boom. But then it busted and the whole industry consolidated in 2003. So I always wanted to start my own business. And that's where I thought, well, I knew semiconductors because I got into the semiconductor side of telecommunications, making the chips that amplify internet signals. They were called erbium doped fiber amplifiers, but they used semiconductor lasers to provide the photons to amplify the photons. That's pretty cool technology because you can amplify photons without converting them to electrons in like a control board and then re-emitted them. You can amplify them while they're traveling at the speed of light using these semiconductors. So anyway, when the telecom busted, I had to figure out, well, what do I do with my life now? And my area that was making those lasers got consolidated with the European company. They shut down the US operation. And I thought, do I move back to headquarters and just marketing and technology development, or do I launch out on my own? And so anyway, that's where I launched out on my own. And it was kind of crazy because it was in the midst of a recession, after the dot-com boom and telecom bust, and the dot-com bust. So I started my semiconductor company, and that's where it all began.
Wow. You started a semiconductor company. We're going to get into Nira here soon, but there's some more holes in this story. So you started a semiconductor company. Talk to me about like what happened there. Like, did you sell that company? Or are you still running it? What happened there?
So I'm a big fan of the innovator's dilemma, right? And so in that, basically Clay Christensen lays out an industry that was innovative, that got the industry going, often never disrupts their own industry. You need someone from the outside to come in and disrupt that. You saw that early days with disk drives. Certain disk drives, people that made 5.25-inch discs, they couldn't move to 3.5. It was another company, and they had to acquire that other company, right? And then on to hard disk drives, and then even flash drives are different companies, right? So what I decided, I said, I know semiconductors, and I like the fact that people that have no business disrupting a company, an industry, those are the ones that actually do it, is those that don't know any better. So I thought, all right, you don't see lasers around, right? They're really expensive. The only thing I really knew is if you go to like doctors, like Extreme Makeover was getting popular at that time. And that's where people would go and have laser surgery and tummy tucks and, you know, augmentations of their breasts and other things, if they're female, etc. But the laser piece was like the best in class for skin rejuvenation and skin improvements, like with rosacea and other, you know, marks that you want to change or remove, like tattoos and things. So I thought, well, what if we could take lasers and bring them to the home market? So you didn't need to go through these dramatic, month-long procedures and downtime and recoveries, but you could look new at home, kind of like you see in some of the Star Trek, episodes where they have those, handheld wands, and they wand and can measure your health, and they can, fix you. And in one scene, there was even some lasers where they were, fixing a tissue laceration with a laser. And I thought, well, why can't we do that? And I saw my father's industry go from integrated circuits, which started in vacuum tubes, right, to then integrated circuits on a semiconductor chip. And then they got so good that basically you could have a supercomputer in your hand effectively. That why can't we do that with lasers? Put lasers in people's hands like the movies. So anyway, I started the semiconductor. I figured I'd do the chips inside because I don't know how to do systems. I don't know how to sell to consumer markets. I did get an MBA, but it was more B2B MBA. So we made the laser chips, and I thought, all right, we can sell them into doctor systems, which we did. And we're a leading supplier still, that first company, into lasers that plastic surgeons and doctors use. And instead of the large, unreliable, and expensive and low high maintenance systems, they now use smaller semiconductor driven systems. And my company's chips are in there. But we also said, all right, where do you also need mobility and laser power? And so that's where we got into military, range finding, target munitions targeting, things like that. So we're the leader in that realm as well. And then a space company approached me. So now we're into space navigation. They use lasers for docking with the International Space Station, stuff like that. And
They're
then,
using your
what's that?
they're using like your lasers, like your
Yeah,
semiconductors for the lasers. So
yeah, to navigate and dock with the ISS, International Space Station, which is very cool. And I've been on site with some of those companies watching the old docking routine. It's kind of cool because in space, you got inertia is pure, right? So when you're docking, if you want, I can give you a quick story about docking in space.
I'm fascinated. Let's go down this rabbit hole, and we'll get to the DDC side of it. I swear, everyone listening, I'm sure everyone listening is also fascinated by this. Tell me how you
To
use
all
lasers.
your viewers, don't go into the space industry. The volumes are very small.
I
You know, even if
bet.
you get good margins, it's not worth it. But it was cool, so why not do it, right? So if you want to dock with the International Space Station, you don't want to just come like right in and dock quickly, right? In fact,
Right.
they gauge it so you come in and you're so many, like football fields away, and you have to stop, and then you communicate between the ISS and the shuttle or whatever, the Dragon capsule or whatever capsule you do there. Then you go in closer and you stop and you communicate. Is everything okay? Then you go in closer and you stop. And then it used to be they had this arm that came up, would grab it and would pull in the last little bit, right? And that worked great for many, many years. But with a lot of people, they said, well, we really want to just dock automatically or faster. So anyway, when you stop, okay, so you got thrusters and you're trying to get perfectly aligned with perfect speed, the perfect rotational, you know, rotational momentum, etc. But if you're off by a little bit of wobble and then you stop, it drifts away. It slowly drifts out from there. And then they say, okay, close enough. Now go to the next station. And then when you say stop, then it drifts. And that's where the arm would come in and grab it before it drifts too far away, right? And you don't want to get so close that you're not perfectly aligned and you crash in there and ideally breach the hull. That would be catastrophic. So anyway, they showed me this and it was very cool how they were doing this. And they said, all right, now with the lasers that you provided, let me show you the comparison. And you come in and it stopped and it was so accurate. It's like you were on solid ground together, just like you're parking a car, you put in park, then you move in closer, it stopped. And they got so much confidence that they said, all right, all we need is a little spring loaded, catcher at the ISS so that we can go right in and dock in the last few inches, have this like shock absorbing cushion to just finalize the meeting. And so now that's what they do now all the time. It was very cool to be part of that.
That is super fascinating. And I assume, based on what you said about never going to the space industry, is why you moved into beauty care with your lasers. I've been dealing with NASA. Like, I'm out.
I don't know if beauty's any easier, to be honest. It's a very, very demanding market, which is good, which is good. It should be demanding.
Well, so that kind of goes into my next question for you. That kind of perfectly. I mean, you are basically a laser scientist, right up there with the rocket
Correct.
scientist. I was going to ask,
Well,
like, well, surely everyone always says that business isn't rocket science. So how have you found it to be like working with NASA? What challenges have you had to overcome here with this with Nira? And maybe before you answer that, explain a bit what Nira actually is for our audience, so they're a little bit with what
yeah,
you
just
do.
to finish the story. So we were making these chips for professional
Mhm.
systems, but I really wanted to make ones. Remember the handheld Dream, like
Yeah.
Star Trek, right? And so we partnered with a couple companies that were coming out with lasers for the home market, and they were made by folks like Tria and Palomar and Reliant, which is now Solta Medical. And they launched a bunch of different systems, and we had some chips inside many of those systems. But they used the same technology as the professional market, and they just brought it to the home market. In the professional market, they use what's called fractional laser technology. So they go deep and intense on these little dots, and they'll treat you once a month for like 3 months. And those dots randomize, and you basically destroy these little dots of tissue in a column right through the dermis. And it causes the healthy tissue nearby to make it heal quickly. And now you have new skin and where that dot would be. And as you randomize that, you turn over your skin very quickly, and now your skin's rejuvenated. because you basically destroyed the skin over several months of monthly treatments. And it works and it's best in class. But as you can imagine, when you're destroying a column of tissue, if that lines up with a pain receptor, it's going to hurt, it's going to sting. And of course, you also have some capillary bursts, which is erythema or redness. So you get it's red, it's painful. You get some downtime with it, and then you got to go for monthly treatments, and it's expensive. So anyway, a couple companies started to move this to home market. I thought, all right, here it is. I'm finally getting chips to home market. That was the dream, right? So I'm selling chips into them, and then I saw what was happening, right? And they launched one. Unilever partnered with a company to launch something called Illuminage. Philips, the company out of Europe, partnered with a professional system that launched the Riora. And Palomar went on their own, launching their own product, Palavia. They all kind of came, the genesis was professional skincare companies made these home units, but they did it the exact same way. And I thought to myself, well, it's not a very good user experience because you have to get up in the morning, you have to treat yourself, and you're going to feel pain, you're going to cause redness, and it's not going to be pleasant, right? And they were also expensive systems. They were like $1,000 or more. But I said, all right, these guys know what they're doing. So anyway, they all pretty much went out of business because the user experience was so bad. Okay. And in parallel to that, I developed my own technology with a side company. I created a side company and say, I think I can do it better. I'm not a doctor, but I talked to all the doctors. I talked to the inventors of these technologies. I sold to doctors. And I went to the dermatology conferences. I listened to the papers. I looked at the science and I saw, okay, we can stimulate collagen production at a point below the pain threshold and below the point where you get erythema or bursting of blood vessels, and well below the point of erythema, or I'm sorry, necrosis, which is the cell destruction. So there's this gap where at 39C, you're stimulating collagen production, which is a mild stress, and it generates heat shock proteins, which basically say, I'm under stress as a dermis, bring in reinforcements because I might need some help. And it just naturally brings in reinforcements and creates more collagen, elastin, rejuvenates the skin. The weak cells kind of turn over and kind of give up and say, all right, make a new one to replace this one. And but at 45C, you get pain, but you're stimulating below that. So I said, instead of just blasting right to necrosis, making significant damage, what if we just treat to the point just underneath the pain threshold and maximize the heat shock protein and the collagen synthesis? So anyway, I made some 3D printed prototypes and I put lasers with some cooling and some crude optics, and I made my own handpiece. Originally, it was plug in the wall, and then I did one that was had a battery pack that was a few pounds, and then I integrated into, and it all worked. I did a clinical study, and then I met the innovator's dilemma head on because I literally had this working prototype and preliminary clinical study, and I went to everyone in the industry, and they literally, I felt like the guy, Dyson, who tried to sell his better vacuum cleaner to the industry. And you can see in some of his podcasts, he says, thank God no one invested in him, because now he's got a multi-billion-dollar company, right?
Right.
But he had better technology, but everyone in the industry says, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no business being here. And that's what I got. Everyone in the industry, I talked to everyone. And then I said, all right, what if I go to like the big beauty companies? So I went to all the big beauty companies, says, I got a better technology. And everyone said they were interested, but they said, look, we're a lotions and potions company. We don't know anything about lasers. You have to launch it and prove you get a market, prove that it's safe, etc. So I was in a no man's land. The industry wouldn't accept me, the laser industry, and the end customers loved it, but they weren't going to take the risk and they didn't know anything about it. So this is where a lot of innovators fall, and you got to be crazy enough to. I had just a few angel investors, and I said, we either have to launch this or shut it down and actually build a brand, which we didn't even have a brand at the time. So they said, go for it. And I actually said a prayer. I said, God, I don't want to run a consumer company because I've heard, the percentages, they're crazy. Almost
Oh yeah.
everybody fails going
Yeah,
into
it's very
consumer.
to start one for sure.
You have to start one, and especially if you're developing a new vertical. If you're developing like a Me Too or a slightly spin on existing market, it's easy because you can say, all right, my sparkling soda is different because I have a hint of lime with it or something. And people
Yeah.
just try something because it's an offshoot, but you know you have a market. When you wake up in the morning, you don't think, oh, I got a laser in my face today. Nobody thinks that, right? You know?
When you said at a friend, he spent a whole year developing this app. It's like a learning app. Like, oh, like a language learning app? Like, no, everything but language is like, okay, well, that's really broad and vague. And so I asked him, like, are you sure people, want this? And he's like, everyone tells me they're super interested. Like, yeah, but is anyone giving you money for it? Like, oh no. Like, you should run some like Facebook ads before you like build this thing. See if you can't like get a wait list, like to
Yeah,
your point, it's tough because you have to educate the market on what your product is super, super quick to get them into
yeah,
like
exactly.
actually engaging with you, right? Much less all the other typical marketing stuff like conversion rates.
Yeah, but and it's hard when you have a capital intensive product, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at, what Elon's done with Tesla and SpaceX and everything. It's just unbelievable. But and he's had to get a lot of capital to support that. But the good news is once you get over the hump where you've got a product, you've got protected IP, and you've got an infrastructure, if you're creating a new vertical, like Elon was with electric cars and with reusable rockets, you get
Mhm.
so far ahead of people, you basically own the space, right? And so that's what we're doing with home lasers, essentially. We went out on our own and we got a little bit of help with COVID because we launched just before COVID and then everyone was at home. So D2C was where you had to go, right?
Stuck at
So,
home, why not laser my face?
yeah. So
That was the ad.
they were watching more content and they were buying online. So we got $2 million our first year, right out of the gate from 0 to 2 million. And that was kind of a godsend.
That was your Series A, right? The 2 mil.
No, that was the revenue. That was the revenue.
That was. Oh, I'm sorry, revenue. Okay,
Yeah.
but
So
that's amazing.
we took 8 years to develop the technology, okay, which is not uncommon if you're developing a new vertical to spend close to a decade developing it. And then when we launched, we got 2 million our first year. We had the clinical studies, we had the FDA clearance, we had good before and after. So that 8 years, we were developing the technology, but also all of the content and the credibility. So when we launched, we could say, yeah, this is literally using the same chip as your professional dermatologist. We just put in a handpiece, we reduce the power. So instead of doing monthly treatments with your derm, you're doing daily treatments. And in fact, if you add up the daily treatments, you're actually getting more energy than the professional treatment once a month. And that's how we can get equivalent efficacy and avoid the side effects because we spread it out to daily treatments. And it started to work. And so then we had the challenge of growing a brand, and which I have never done before, especially consumer, and building a team. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun, but a lot of work.
First of all, I think this story is like amazing. What a bunch of plot twists from the semiconductors, NASA, SpaceX, to now lasers in people's hands. You really are bringing forth Star Wars and cyberpunk to the real world.
Yeah,
So very
cool.
cool, David. Before we move on to like building your real brand, I want to talk a little bit about that. Like you said, 2 million in 6 months in revenue. Is that what you said?
The first year, so
First year.
2000, we launched in 2000 was our first full year.
Talk to me about that actual launch. Like, what did you guys do? Because you have you spent 8 years in research, clinical trials, all that kind of stuff. But what was the actual action you did to like go to market with this?
I hired someone who had a few years experience in D2C marketing. So we decided we would test everything. So we took a very engineering approach. And so we put a kiosk in a store, like a high end pharmacy. We had one of our investors in Ireland. So she lent us three of her stores and we put three kiosks in there. And we saw would they sell. So we tried retail relatively early. And what we found is it needs education. People aren't going to walk up to a kiosk, even with a nice video. We had an iPod streaming before and afters and how to's, and you could even interact with it. And it was on a tether, so you could try it. You could try the device and then you could buy it. But it was just too much education in a retail environment. If we had a person there who could interact with them and explain it, answer their questions, the product would sell. but it was too expensive. It wouldn't have been a viable channel, profitable channel at that stage. So we decided, all right, how do we take this? And so we actually tried some D2C late night commercials on TV because older people are watching those and things. And it was hard because it's not an impulse purchase. D2C is good if it can be an impulse, ideally sub $100. Sub
Yeah.
50 is great, right? But putting out $300-400 on a 30-minute commercial, even tried a mini infomercial and was on like daytime TV show segments and things like that, which is not me. I don't see myself as kind of a beauty salesman, right? But we gave it a try, and that's what you got to do, right? And so what we decided, what we learned in parallel to this, we started some online ads. And the online ads, the nice thing is you can educate with them, sometimes get emails with follow up and drive a funnel to conversion, things like that. So we said, look, we're too early for retail, we're too early for D2C, TV, like broadcasting. We really got to go for a niche of innovators in beauty space where we can target them directly. So that's where we got most of the 2 million that first year was just D2C marketing. And literally our employees were models. We took our own photography. We literally would just go out on site and we were just trying stuff and seeing what works and then putting more paid ads behind content that worked. And then it wasn't until our end of our second year we got into influencers and affiliates, and that was a big step up. And with that, into our third year, we quadrupled sales to 15 million. And that's where, we had all of the elements in place from D2C marketing, but also the email flows and follow ups and the influencers, which are kind of paid spokespeople, but they take, a small payment for the placement, but then they also potentially get some royalties based on sell through. And then affiliates are just paid by, the sell through commission. And then everything kind of working together. That's what just kind of shot us forward.
Oh, that's awesome. So you started off, I assume the ads you were running were like meta ads, like Facebook ads to begin with.
Yeah. Like 95 plus percent was all Facebook.
Yeah.
And it's wild. In just the last 4 years, everything's changed. Like everything's changed. Like Apple came out with the iOS change where you couldn't target folks. It used to be, as I'm sure many of your viewers know, you could select by demographics. I want women of this age group who have interest in anti-aging beauty and maybe has bought something in the last 3 months. And literally, you could select that demographic and advertise to it and see what works and then change it. Now, we don't know the personal information. A lot of people think that's strange or inappropriate, but it's still a huge market and we don't know who we're targeting and we only
Yeah.
respond if they respond to us. So it keeps anonymity and confidentiality, but nonetheless, Apple made their change and literally overnight, small companies like us got destroyed because nothing was working you know so as I'm sure Facebook and Google had to innovate how they address people without addressing people. So they do it by these learning algorithms, right? But our Facebook literally went from nearly 100% to like less than 20%, and we had to jump on paid ads with Google search because that's the only thing that was working. And we had to ramp down our spend for Facebook like mad because we were losing money after making money. So it's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, I remember when that came out, man. I remember way back in the day, like you used to be able to scrape individual users' UID, like Facebook allowed you to do that. So if I
Mhm.
wanted to run an ad only targeting you, I could do that, like just to Dave. I actually learned that when I was still in the oil field. I used to be an oil field roughneck. And a funny story, my manager, he would make me clean these pits on an oil rig, very dirty, disgusting job. And so I scraped his UID and ran an ad of like a Photoshop picture of him and me like hugging. And he thought
No.
everyone in Alaska was seeing this ad, right? But it's really just like him. I'm spending like, $1 a day, but it's like a target of one, right? It really freaked him out. Like, I'll turn it off when you when I don't have to clean a pit anymore. But it worked. I got what I wanted. Yeah, those were the days like Teespring, like, hey Greg, it's your birthday. Like, oh God, it used to be really creepy back then. But yeah, the new algorithms, I feel like all the work Facebook has done in that area, and I guess Google too to a lesser extent, I do feel like it's kind of back up. But what has been your experience now with Facebook's new way of doing things? Have you seen your ROI improve, or where are you at with that?
Yeah, Facebook is now 40 to 50%. So they've come back up. They're not the 95 plus percent they used to be. And part of
Yeah,
that's just the changing demographics too. People are spending more time on Instagram and other platforms than Facebook. So we've had
yeah,
to spread our marketing dollars out to where people are viewing and what converts. And frankly, go to more long form views and more user generated content as well. So we've had to make adjustments, and it's interesting. It's changed how advertising happens. Like Black Friday, I was talking to some other folks, used to be a day, right? Black Friday used to be a day. Now it's like a week or even a season. People start in November. A lot of that people don't realize that advertisers have to advertise earlier because they have to see, is their advertising converting, how is it converting, and the systems have to learn. It's because we can't target like we used to and focus that on one day. And so anyway, because of that, Facebook's back, but it's now one of many.
yeah. And to be honest, that's a safer route. I think in general is to have one of many. I have a lot of friends; they only do Facebook ads or only SEO, and SEO update happens, and they get it's like the apocalypse. It destroys their entire business overnight. No traffic. So I think even though it's less than what it was before, overall that's good in the sense that you're now more omni-channel, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
that's very good. I want to move back a little bit. So congrats on the launch. I really like the way you approached it, right? But you did get Series A funding for the business. Is that right? Like it was like around the 6 month mark, or is that not true?
Well, we've gotten a few rounds. They've all been individual angel investor rounds.
Okay. So my question for you is there's a lot of people listening to this podcast. They want to do an innovative big idea like what you're doing. What advice would you give to those entrepreneurs who are seeking early stage funding?
It's a good question. Bring your idea as far forward as you can by yourself, okay? And what I mean by that is if you can prototype it, or as you mentioned, get some, even before you have the product, if you can get a wait list going and just show that there's some demand, there's some interest. And I had to do that with some of the prototypes we talked about. And I had industry knowledge that I could bring forward and I could talk to people. And so that helps you build a business plan. So you need a solid business plan that has some real substance to it. And that's just a lot of sweat equity. There's no way around it. Unless you have a track record of having several successful companies, you can't just come with an idea on a napkin anymore. It just doesn't work. But with that plan and credibility, where you've got some history in the market and the technology and everything, then raise, typically it's a convertible note where you say you're going to get a loan and then I'll convert to the next formal round. If you can sell stock straight away, I've known a few people that sold common stock without preferences. That's even ideal because then you don't have a deadline of when that note has to convert and you have to raise more money, which is a big hassle. It's no one likes this, but you literally, as a CEO, you pretty much have to do two full-time jobs early on. You have to run the business and then you have to be financing the business and literally be in front of investors and searching out and getting introductions and pitching the business to fund the business while you're running the business, which a lot of people don't realize that. You can't stop one to do the other, and you can't forego the funding and just do the development, or else you're going to flame out. You're going to run out of money. So you just have to know what you're getting into. And sometimes if you don't, but you're committed to the idea, you're going to be passionate about it, then because of your passion, you just plow through it. And that was my case. I just was so committed to the idea and I was enjoying what I was doing. And it was just cool, the thought of doing some of these things, that I spent the long hours and things like that. Actually wrote a lot of the systems, the software, the databases that run the back office and everything because couldn't afford to do it. And a lot of those are now paying big dividends because we can do things much faster, more automated than before. So what's could be seen as a drudgery and a curse at the beginning, having to sort out things on a dime, often pays big dividends in the long term because it forces you to be efficient, to do things really well, because you can't afford to do it otherwise. I often told my team, we're too small to be inefficient, and I often criticize them if they don't do it right the first time. It's like, why didn't you ask me? Or why did you ask me before we went in that direction? Because that's the wrong direction. Now I have to pay for you to come all the way back, cut that off and do it this way, and I do it in a nice way and try to educate them and say, look, let's be a team about this. Let's be smart about this. We can't afford to do things over. And so anyway, that's my advice is, first of all, if you're not passionate about an idea, you just want to be an entrepreneur to make money, you're not going to be successful, in my opinion, right? Unless you just have a sugar daddy somewhere that is going to fund you until you can buy enough success, right, with hiring people to do it for you. But yeah, be passionate. If you're passionate and you're committed, then do as much as you can. And then, of course, you're going to probably need funding unless you're a really low capital, company like an app or some software or something or a service. With those, you often don't need as much capital. So then you can avoid financing in general, which is great if you can get away with it. And then you get investors, but just be careful. You want to get the right investors, right? You don't want to get investors where you give away too much to people you don't necessarily know, because the tables could turn on you. And there's a whole lot of stories about that. So, do your homework, watch a ton of, biographies and case studies and things like that so that you can avoid those mistakes.
I think what you just said there, the right investors, that's a key thing. So, like, when a person comes to me to sell their business, they often are dancing with the buyer, and the buyer often has way more M&A experience than them because the
Yeah.
seller is like usually it's their first real business, right? And this is their first real exit. And so they're just operating with less knowledge on the
Mhm.
battlefield with the buyer. But the ironic thing is, I tell this to sellers all the time, is like, you do not need to sell to the buyer. Like, if you have a high quality business, it's the buyer that needs to sell you, because there's not that many of great businesses out there that are of this certain revenue level that a buyer really, really wants. Like, all they
Yeah.
can give you is money. So make sure it's the right buyer, like similar to your advice with the right investors, right? You want to know, like, am I getting in the pool with an orca or with a shark? Like, much prefer the orca. They're way better than sharks, and they won't eat me most likely.
That's a really good point, because when you're in my position trying to sell the company for investment, you think that, you're desperate, right? And you take whatever money, you can, right? That's just the bent because you're so desperate, right? And you know the need, and there's an endpoint that if you don't get there with money, you're dead, right? But you got to flip that and approach it like a numbers game. You know, there's a lot of money on the sidelines out there. There's a lot of money that see the stock market's overvalued and they want to play some money with private placement, but they don't have access to private placement. Most, even wealthy people, like, where do they go? Do you go to Start Engine, or do you join an angel group? So when one falls in their lap through a network, they'll take a look. It's an interest that if they have money on the side, to see, hey, maybe I'll take a flyer. It's good cocktail hour conversation and things like that, right? So you just want to be of interest to them, but you got to play the numbers game. You just got to network a lot. You got to get in front of groups. You got to put yourself out there. And then a bunch of people that have the capital, show the interest, willing to take the risk, they'll identify themselves. And then hopefully that's more than you need, and you can be somewhat selective with that, or set the terms that the power play is not going to manifest itself.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice, especially the numbers game. Like, we started doing a new marketing strategy here at EF, and one of our sales guys like, "Oh, we're getting quite a lot of calls on here. So, like, should we say if it's working or not?" And I looked at the calls, and there's only about 50 of them. Like, oh no, we're nowhere close to it being enough yet. Like, we need a lot more volume before we're able to really see it. I think you and I were talking about Hormozy offline, and he has that story with, what was it, the flyers. Where he posted like 300 of them on cars, and he got no response. And he goes back to the guy who taught him, like, I thought this was going to work. He's like, 300? Did I post like 20,000 in a month? Like, what do you mean? It's like, I know you're test or anything less than 10. So,
Yeah.
yeah, numbers will definitely make your journey to get investors better. In terms of like the power play, well, like, what was your ideal investor? And maybe there's something that's useful there for our audience out there looking for investors. Like, what did you seek?
Well, I talked to a number of entrepreneurs, and one thing I did early on when just as I was starting my first company, I heard the story of Steve Jobs that he dialed up the founders of Hewlett Packard and got a meeting, I think it was with Mr. Packard, and then got the internship. And so I thought, wow, if Jobs as a teenager can call one of the biggest electronics companies, maybe I should call some CEOs in my market. So literally, I looked in the Boston areas and I started calling medical device companies. And I'd get the gatekeeper, the secretary of the boss, and I'd just be completely honest. I say, look, I'm starting a company for the first time. I just want 15 minutes with the founder of the company just to get his advice. Would you believe every single one gave me time? And I'd go in for 15 minutes and I almost always got an hour. It was just amazing. And if you think of it, that almost never happens in the real world. People are just don't reach out to people like that. They think they're unapproachable or couldn't get their time. But obviously, you respect their time and you got to really mean what you're saying. And so, with that, I got good advice and that helped build my network. And as part of that, to answer your question, I asked about the type of investment, and a reoccurring theme said, be very, very careful of the sophisticated investors, like venture capitalists, private equity, etc. Because as soon as something is to their advantage, and I'm sure they're not all this way, but just the sentiment I got is the vast majority, if they can turn the tables to advantage themselves over anybody, they will. And they also have certain agendas. Like often they have funds that have a certain timeline and they have to
Yeah.
exit and cash out. And they don't care if that means you're basically destroying the company. They would rather, have them reach for the stars and do a Hail Mary with all their remaining cash. And if that means they flame out if they're not successful and go utterly bankrupt, but it potentially would hit their timeline, they'll do it, right? And I was like, I don't want to flame out. And really great companies actually build much more slowly, especially capital intensive ones, than the typical VC timeline. So knowing that, I said I'm going to really try to focus on number one, being capital efficient so I don't need that much money and I don't flame out. I lower the risk of flaming out just for lack of capital. And number two, go with friendly, diversified individuals so that no one person has too much power, but treat them well. So I gave them good value. I said, look, at terms aren't negotiable, but pricing is. So I'll give you more equity, but I need these terms to be fair because when we're done with the deal, I want to be on the same side of the table. Whereas your terms are the same and we both exit, we both get the same slice of the pie
Yeah.
proportionally, etc. Right? So that seems to have worked out for me. I've yet to get my first exit, so the story hasn't finished yet.
I'm waiting right here for you, David. Don't you worry.
I've got two profitable companies that are growing nicely and have competitive advantage. So now we're just growing the companies well and carefully so that we're positioning ideally to be purchased, not to be sold. And I'm sure you know the difference.
For sure, for sure. For my audience out there, that means he'll make a lot more money. Is what he means. Which is great. Man, I really love what you said here. So first off, on the calling all the CEOs, right? Like you are so right. Like the ability to interact with the rich and the famous is actually not as difficult as people think it is. Like here's a great example. I cold DM'd a cold LinkedIn message the founder of Priceline, like way back in the day when
Oh,
Priceline
yeah.
was like kind of new thing, like for selling airline tickets, right? I heard him on this family office podcast and I really liked what he had to say. So I literally just shot him a message on LinkedIn, like, hey, I have absolutely zero agenda. I would love to talk to you for like 20 minutes for no other reason other than I think you sounded really cool on this podcast. And he said yes.
Really?
It turns out he has philanthropic event here in Vietnam. So him and I are hopefully going to hook up down the road when he does it again down here. But yeah, so we got on the phone and like 20 minutes getting to know the guy was super cool. It turned into 40 minutes. Turns out he's really into horror movies and he actually produces them, but he had to take his name off of the horror movie because all his charities were like, "Oh, you're a Satan worshiper." He's like, "What? I'm not. It's a horror movie." Like, yeah, but all of
Right,
our
right.
investors think you are now. You got to remove your name from the horror movies. So his buddy Eli Roth, I think that was the director. They were college friends. So after he made all his big exit with Priceline, he like called up Eli like, "Yo, you still want to make movies? I'll handle the business side. You do the art side." But yeah, this is just like a cold DM, and like, wow, what a who would have thought that would have happened just by me sending a random message to someone on the internet? What a crazy conversation that was.
Well, yeah, and surprisingly, yeah, it works, and it also gives you confidence that you can follow your dreams. The people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world, as Apple says, are the ones that do it. And so, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to have that in you, or don't even try, because you got to put yourself out there.
Absolutely. I think like that whole, I almost want to bring you back for another podcast to talk more about the investment side because we haven't even gotten to the marketing side. Like we did a little bit on your e-commerce store, but we're already come to the top of the hour. But what an amazing story. So like before we move into like the more rapid fire questions, talk to me a bit about what you believe the future of Nira is. Like talk to me about where you are right now and like where do you see yourself going with the brand? Like what's your big milestones?
So our mission is to basically transform skincare at home to basically bring professional skincare to the home market. So you get literally best in class efficacy with the best in class user experience. So those that want to basically reverse their age and not only look younger, but have younger skin, truly reverse the age of your skin, that's what we're into. As well as we're going to migrate into making the best skin possible. So addressing skin disease, starting with acne, as well as other skin blemishes and concerns, and also permanent laser hair removal and others. So we started with anti-aging, which is the biggest market. And we've got two products in that. And we're going to launch another product next year that will be just that much better. We also have apps you can customize and optimize the laser to your skin, which is very cool. You can also take before and after pictures, track your progress, skin analysis, and more with online coaching through the app. But then we're going to move in other skin concerns, addressing one major new skin concern each year with a follow-on product. So the idea being is if you want great skin, you come to Nira and we can address your concern at home for a fraction of the cost and a great solution without any of the downtime or other concerns.
Do you ever put in your marketing space station approved technology?
Hey, that's a good idea. I
I'm
think
a
we should.
copywriter.
ISS approved. Yeah. If it's good enough for the astronauts, it's good enough.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. I feel like I could have you back on for another episode to talk more about like the growth stuff you did here, which I think is also very interesting. But we're coming
Okay.
up at the top of the hour. So I did want to move into the rapid fire section. But before we do that, my final question before we move in there, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs who are looking to bring disruptive products to market?
You guys are the ones that truly transform the world, right? You know, so if you're passionate about it, that's great. You create more value in our economy and for the country and for the world, and you transform people's lives more than anything. So I would encourage you to dig into it, do your homework, and then if it truly is viable, if there's a way forward, that you go for it.
Great advice. All right. So, rapid fire section, three quick questions with three quick answers. So, in your view, what are the best hidden growth opportunities in the e commerce industry right now?
That's a tough question. You talking by product or by service?
Purely subjective from your point of view.
So it's changing so much. Honestly, I'm a little bit baffled by that because I don't feel like I'm an expert because, even followers are not as valuable as they used to be because of the way the algorithms changed and the feed on YouTube is different. It doesn't value followers like it used to, and viewership is way off. So I guess the best thing you can be in this, the opportunity is to be nimble, okay? To be agile and to adjust. And you got to constantly be educating yourself on it. If you can do that and then make the most of being the first to optimize to the new reality of direct marketing, then you do really well.
I love that. Being nimble. It's very good advice. What tools or resources would you recommend for people looking to grow their e commerce brands?
They change so much. from HubSpot to Shopify to CES tools to Adobe tools. It's amazing the innovation in this marketplace. In fact, I get on my marketing team sometimes. It's like, you guys have so many tools. Can we pare this back a little bit? Or they want to buy another tool. It's like, all right, we have so many tools, but you need yet another tool. Is it better than something else we can get rid of? So we're on Shopify, and I think that's the gold standard for website. We have really good luck with that, but you got to be careful. We got into a situation where we got all these plugins into Shopify, which lowered the response rate, right? Which made it not so nimble. And we literally had to redo the whole Shopify using a standardized template with more modest customizations because a standardized template would just go faster, which helped with conversion rates and things like that. So you got to be careful. It's not one silver bullet. Everyone's always looking, oh, I get this and I'll be able to track, my conversion rate so much better. And even that, I've talked to some experts, and we hired an outside consultant for a month who had worked for big, huge brands. And, I was quite embarrassed. Our numbers, had differences. We use Triple Whale for some reporting. We use Shopify for some reporting. We use other systems for other reporting. And then you have literally different numbers for the same thing. Like, what was our revenues? And I got different numbers for the day, for the week, for the month. And I was like embarrassed. And he said, you know what, actually, your numbers are pretty good. I'm like, how can they be good? I've got three different numbers. And he says, like, everyone is struggling to get really good numbers. It's just there's so many numbers, but you're not sure exactly which one's right. And it's because of, all of these confidentialities and what numbers you can get and when you can get them, and there's delayed attribution, et cetera. So
Speaking of the bane of my existence, yes.
if I gave your viewers, like, do this, app and this service and this, I would be wrong in like a week or a month, right? It's moving that fast. So just be agile. Sorry, back to the original answer.
No, I think that's a great answer. I mean, that rant, a lot of frustrated marketers and a lot of frustrated entrepreneurs who understand marketing, when they talk to someone who doesn't understand marketing, who's talking about some great new attribution thing, like, dude, you're crazy. Like, Google doesn't even know how to do this. Like, what do you mean you can do this? Like, you get out of here. So I totally feel you on that. I actually had a campaign where at first I looked like, oh man, I'm a god at ads. This like conversions going through the roof. Then it turned out my engineering team had put this pixel that was the conversion pixel on the front page because the way it was set up, like they decided to move it. So just like
Oh yeah.
any traffic in the ad, like God, I'm glad I'm like a jaded marketer, and I anything that goes well in marketing, I just assume it's not working, that there's an error. Like we need to dig into this. So,
I've gotten bitten by that same thing. I've gone into meetings and I see numbers and a spike. Like, wow, we had $1 million day. We went from this level to
right.
$1 million.
Uh,
And I'm like, great job. They're like, no, no, settle down. It's an attribution problem, within how
yeah.
this system recognizes from that system because we made a change, and now the attribution went all crazy. So
I sent an email with HubSpot like this email influenced $3.5 million worth of revenue. We sell big businesses, right? So like we sell high ticket stuff. Like, no, it's not true, HubSpot. Thank you, thank you for telling me. It makes my reporting look good. It's definitely not true. Well, okay. My final question for you, and perhaps the hardest question in this section, is what has been your funniest moment since working in the e-commerce world?
funniest moment. Well, I guess it's not funniest, but it was fun. We had an influencer. And the other thing is, some of these influencers are quite popular, right? And I actually try to meet them. And because they can get to know the product and everything, but I think it's important to get to know the person and they get to know me and like why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because we obviously care about what they're doing and we can see that, but they don't really see behind the scenes. So I got to know this influencer and I thought she's going to do really great. And I told her that. And, we had a little debrief and a little Q&A so she could ask me any question about the technology and it would kind of inform her podcast and things like that. So anyway, she launches and then we go through a sellout period. It explodes, right? This is October, which is usually a soft month. And we start exploding, burning through all our inventory. By early November, we're out of stock. even before Black Friday. This is back a couple of years ago. And so I had to call her up and I told the marketing, because I didn't have a direct connection. I said, would you set up a meeting with her? So anyway, and she kept selling like crazy. And we're like out of stock. And the lead time was going to from weeks to a month to approaching 2 months. And so anyway, a funny conversation, a good conversation to have with her. I said, Angie, you just broke my business. And she says, yeah, I guess I did, you know? Of course, she's getting, some royalties off of this or commissions. So she's quite happy and everything. And she says, but I told my viewers I would give them a 3-month follow-up. So she did the initial unboxing and, 1 month. She said, David, I am all about authenticity. And I told her this. One reason we partnered with her is she said, I say what I say. And if I don't like your product, I'm going to say it. I said, that's why we're partnering with you, because we believe in our product, right? And we want you to come across fully authentic. So we didn't pay her for anything. She was purely commissioned. And I love that about her. And that's another reason I wanted to have a call with her, because most people want an upfront payment in addition to some commission. And so anyway, I said, I'm asking you a favor. Can you not post your 3-month update? Because we're already out of stock. We're at the point where we're pushing close to 3 months lead time. And we were still selling product, but we were just upfront that, look, you can order now and we'll fulfill it at this date. And then we give them weekly updates by email of the status of their order. And they love that. Very low cancellation rate, about half the industry average. It was unbelievable, even for multi-month delay, even after Christmas and things like this. It was crazy. And so I said to Angie, all right, you can post, but just delay it 1 month. Do a 4-month update. Tell them it's coming. And can you tell them that we're sold out, and tell them what we're doing about customer service? And she says, you know what, Dave? She said, I actually bought a device for my mother. And she said, I got all your follow-up. She said, I got weekly updates. She said, you even sent me a video walking through the factory, telling people we make it right here in the United States. Yours is in its queue and we will honor our promises. She said, that really made a big impression on the company, that you're not just out for the quick money. You want happy customers. And she said, so sure. So anyway, she posts her 4-month update, right? And we were starting to catch up. We were down to about, 6 weeks, till we were in stock. And she blows us up again. She says, if you order, you won't get it for a couple months. She said, and she was all honest about it. And people she made a second, we laughed about it because it was so much fun and we were totally authentic and it just worked. And so we both had a lot of fun with that.
That is probably the best way to break your business. Of all the ways you could break the enterprise, this is a good one to have.
Yeah.
That is super cool, man. Very cool story in general. And I think, I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been an absolute joy talking to you. And we'll put the links to your e-commerce brand if anyone wants to go check it out, or, embrace the space station approved laser on your face. Greg approved trademark, patent pending. We'll definitely put that stuff in there. But for anyone that wants to connect with you personally, David, and maybe they're a DTC entrepreneur or investor or whatever, they want to pick your brain, what's the best place for them to connect with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and they can reach out to our customer service with the specific requests, and those do get funneled to me. And I often follow up with folks on that basis. As I mentioned to you before, our customer service picks up the phone out of the Philippines, also responds. We have a goal of everything is responded within 24 hours, and ideally within 1 hour. So 1 hour is our goal, but 24 hours is our minimum, our maximum that we'll let it, reasonably go. And even with the busy times, we generally keep up with that. So anyway, they can drop an email or a phone call.
Awesome. We'll put the link to your LinkedIn below. I had a whole thing about your, what kind of KPIs do you focus on, but I got too into the investor timeline stuff that I'll have to perhaps bring you back for another episode. So
yeah, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to check on to see how Nira is going here, and maybe this time next year to see what the new development is. So with that said, thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. I had fun with it too, as I think you can see.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired. at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace. Or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.